Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Bad news for Max Verstappen and Red Bull as the team have now diagnosed what's happening with their new flaw they brought to the Miami Grand Prix. They reckon that it did indeed bring more downforce to the car, but it certainly was not enough to cure many of the issues they are currently having with that RB21 machine. Big upgrades expected over the coming rounds. Surely McLaren will improve their car in some form too over the coming races. Is this it for Max Verstappen over the next couple of Grand Prix? If these upgrades do not work, Horner's job might be on the line as we rumoured a couple of days ago, but also could Max Verstappen really at that point start to look for the exit? Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into today. We're starting here. This is Max Verstappen at the Nordschleife. Now, well, you know, this is Franz Hermann. If you guys didn't notice yesterday, he had this guy Franz Hermann on his car. Very Dutch name, of course. But look, I think that he knew and everyone knew that yes, he was going to be there, and people were taking photos of him. I don't think it's allowed to have a different name on your helmet. Like, I think that's a rule. So you can see that it says Max Verstappen on his helmet here. I don't think that he actually can legally, not legally, but you know what I mean, within the confines of the regulations that track have Franz Hermann on his helmet. But it was all rather funny. There was a lot of talk as well about what type of lap time he did. Like, how good was it? Because he's obviously trying to get this license so he can potentially race at the 24 Hours of Nürburgring later this year, which would be pretty fascinating. Now, apparently he did a 7:48, but others are saying that he did a 7:56. Nobody really knows. The lap record for that type of car is a 7, you know, in the GT3 class is a 7:49, and Verstappen supposedly did this on high fuel and stuff like that, but you know, balance of performance, there's all this other kind of complicated factors you've got to take into account here, and he had traffic. So 7:48 to me seems probably unlikely, but who knows? I don't know. That's the rumour in the media anyway. We don't really have official lap times for this, and maybe it doesn't massively matter, but Max was cooking at the Nürburgring. No real surprises there. Now, I did want to get into, speaking of, well, Ferrari, GT3, some of these cars, a bit of drama involving Kamui Kobayashi, and what this could mean at some point for Formula 1. It's mainly relevant in the context of the censorship discussion around the FIA, but if you guys have been following the 6 hours of Spa, the WEC Championship is well underway, and Ferrari absolutely locked out everything yesterday. The race is still underway, and it's right now pretty interesting. But the Toyota, so just to quickly give a background on this, in WEC, there's something called balance of performance, and if your car is faster, they will slow it down. If your car is slower, they will speed it up, basically, by adding weight to the faster cars and reducing the amount of power that they can output. Now, Toyota have had a great car, so their car is therefore made heavier and weaker than its rivals. Now, the point of this is to make all the cars the same, but as we know, that never really happens, right? And there's lots of, let's say, conspiracy theories going around as to whether Ferrari are being effectively gifted the championship by the FIA because they want a Ferrari championship, so Ferrari stay around, so they're giving them beneficial balance of performance. It's a really controversial topic that we can't dive into great detail on today. It's not something that's ever going to come to Formula 1, but the point really is that the drivers aren't allowed to talk about it. This is Kamui Kobayashi, of course, legendary Formula 1 driver in his own right, to be honest. He's done a great job in WEC for a long time, Le Mans winner now, of course, and all this other stuff. But yeah, he refused to comment on it because he was asked, you know, what's going on with the car, and he didn't really say anything. But he can't really say anything. What he did say, actually, was in the replies. I mean, imagine you got this from the drivers on Twitter and F1, when he quote tweets this fifth gear account. Competition is getting more difficult every time for the Ferrari man. So, yeah, some subtweeting going on, let's say, about what's currently happening in the WEC Championship, but I think it's relevant for the fact that the drivers aren't allowed to really talk about or criticise the balance of performance standings. They just have to kind of pretend that they lost on pure pace, which is obviously very controversial. So, yeah, it's a topic maybe for another day, but certainly the FIA are considering, well, potentially revoking some of those Article B or whatever it was called, regulations they recently brought in on the censorship of what the drivers can say, but yeah, it seems like that's not going anywhere yet. We know that Ben Sulayem the other day said, oh yes, definitely after what the drivers said, I am considering changing the rules about the swearing and all this, but of course it's not happened yet, so we will see. Couple of bits of driver drama. I think also, speaking of these other championships, Alex Palou has been absolutely frying in IndyCar lately. Like, Palou's been the best driver in that series for a good few years, but his start, there's been 4 Grand Prix so far and he's won 3 of them, which is just so unprecedented in IndyCar. He got pole yesterday by like 4/10. It's almost a joke. But what I will say is that Palou to Cadillac, surely they've got to think about it. I would at least have the conversation. But the other driver drama elsewhere is definitely interesting. When Pablo Montoya said that as far as he's concerned, if Lawson doesn't get any better and fast, they're going to put Lindblad in the car. Now, of course, we talked about this last year when, okay, Lindblad doesn't currently have the super license points or whatever, but Antonelli last year was in a similar boat, and we thought that Mercedes were trying to get him an exemption to put him in the car, potentially the Williams, instead of Sargent in the second half of last year. That never happened, but there is a feeling that Red Bull will want to put Arvid Lindblad, who finally won, not finally, he was only a few couple of races into the season, right? But he won an F2 race back in Saudi Arabia. And that was a big deal for him and the entire team, and Lindblad almost certainly will be in Formula 1 at some point. Right now, it feels to me that Lawson is effectively fighting Hadjar to keep one of those drives for next year, but knowing how Red Bull are, it's not an impossibility that happens mid-season. Montoya seems to think that's absolutely a possibility, that he could get demoted from two teams in the space of a single season. Now, how much pressure is Franco Colapinto under? It's now, of course, been confirmed. Doohan is gone. Colapinto is in that Alpine going forwards, but he has, according to sources, a 5-race contract. Now, yeah, I think they even confirmed this officially themselves. Rumour has it they're exploring options. He's under some sort of pressure. We talked even about the likes of Sergio Perez the other day potentially being a candidate. And look, if Colapinto doesn't deliver, yeah, he's got big backing, big sponsor money, all that type of stuff. But if you reach out to Perez, look, would Perez drive for Alpine, Mercedes engine next year, or would he drive for Cadillac? If Perez has the choice, I'm taking the Alpine drive, to be honest. We know they can build a chassis. The Mercedes engine's likely to be the best. You join Cadillac, great. You're going to drive around at the back more than likely, let's be honest here. So, you know, Alpine would be an attractive option. Is Colapinto really under much pressure, or is this purely a Flavio Briatore tactic where, you know, he just plays the game at what the media want to hear, what he wants to tell his drivers, to try and make them perform? Whether that's going to work in reality is a different question, but there's no doubt that Doohan will be watching from the sidelines when Colapinto takes to the track in Imola. Now let's talk about Red Bull and the potential future here for Max Verstappen, because so far this season, Russell has maybe been the best driver so far. I mean, who have been the best drivers of the season? I would say Max, probably. Then I would say probably Russell. I think Leclerc has got to be up there in the conversation. And then, of course, Oscar Piastri. I think you can, you know, Lando's somewhere in the mix. Even there's maybe other drivers, even the likes of Gasly maybe, that you could say has done a great job. I think Albon deserves a lot of credit as well. But it's not like every weekend has been perfect. Piastri, to me, probably can't be considered better than Russell or Max, just because, you know, Piastri's been excellent, but you can't really forget Australia too quickly. The mistake that he made at the end of the day, yes, they reached that final sector where it was raining first, but Lando kept it on track and Piastri didn't, and it cost him a potential great shot at the win. So that moment alone, to me, puts Piastri kind of out of contention for best driver of the season so far, you know, but obviously it's early in the season. But Russell and Verstappen have probably been the two best, or very much up there. I'm sure people are going to have their opinions on that. Russell's maximised most weekends, most sessions. He's been top 5 every single competitive session of the year so far, which is very impressive in that Mercedes. And again, even in Miami, he, you know, people say he did nothing. And okay, he maybe got kind of lucky with a virtual safety car, whatever, but he still executed well in a car that definitely is having tyre degradation issues and secured yet another podium. But Russell doesn't have a pole position. As good as he has been, and at times as good as that car has been in qualifying, he's not got a win, he's not got a pole position, whereas his teammate Kimi Antonelli does. I think this is the question, right? Because Russell's actually not led a lap. He may have led one, but basically he's not led a lap this year. He's not, you know, started from pole in any sort, even though pole position has been gettable. I mean, Max has done it. Obviously, both of the McLaren guys have done it. And now even Antonelli found a way to do it, nearly in the main Grand Prix quali as well, but certainly in sprint qualifying. So I'm not saying Russell's been bad or anything like that. I think Antonelli is impeccable and will continue to prove that over the coming years. My point is Russell doing enough with respect to the Antonelli piece of the puzzle, right? Because if you are Mercedes, Russell's done a great job, but he's not led a lap and he's not got a pole. Now, it's only 6 races into the season, but if you're Toto Wolff and you had the choice to bring in Max Verstappen, that I think is where the conversation gets a little bit interesting, right? Because if you put Max in that Mercedes this year, would he have scored more points so far than Russell has? Would he have won a race? Maybe that would be a push, but would he have got a pole? I mean, look, if Kimi got a pole, Max has got 3 poles in that Red Bull, you would probably think that Max could have done so in that Mercedes too, right? So that's when I think things get kind of interesting, especially with Max's future as a conversation point, is that Russell, especially after what happened in Miami, is finding himself under some pressure from Antonelli. It's not like Antonelli is close to Jordan in a championship or really close to him in terms of tyre management and stuff over race distance, but even the small things, Russell being, 3/10 off Antonelli's pole time in the sprint qualifying session, that might raise some doubts in Toto to say, okay, George isn't, perfect in every way, whereas Max often is, although Max, maybe outside of the car, has some baggage that would come along with him, which is maybe something that Mercedes don't want to mess with. So it's a conversation. I'm talking Jos Verstappen, the entourage, that type of stuff, and also the intention, I imagine, to kind of control the team, as it were. So there are a few conversations on that. There's been lots of debate on it. Monahan, though, from Red Bull, says that Tsunoda's settling in quite well, and, he's a good member of his team, he's doing pretty well. Interesting to hear this, right, because the numbers for Red Bull on Yuki don't look great. I mean, if you look at Yuki's average qualifying delta to Max, it's still pretty abysmal in the sessions that are the same, but I think the eye test tells me that he's done better than his predecessors. I think he's been better than Lawson. I think he's been better than Perez was, certainly for the last season or so. He's not been great, but it's not like every weekend we're looking at, the Red Bull second driver and saying, what are this clown doing? He's out in Q1 again, he's in the wall, or whatever the case is. Tsunoda seems to be at least accepting where he currently is with the lack of preparation going into the year, getting it into Q3, accepting that probably P8 is a decent result, as remarkable as that sounds, on every given weekends. But even Marco gives him some gas. Look, we know that Marco's a big Yuki fan, has been for some time, but he says he's the first teammate to get a taste of Max's performance. Now, that sounds an interesting quote. Sounds like he's saying, he's the first guy to really feel the wrath of Max Verstappen in terms of what he can do on the track, which is clearly not true. Every driver that Max has come against pretty much has had that experience. I think what he actually means is that on occasion, Tsunoda has almost been there, right? We've seen a couple of sessions this year where Yuki's been within a tenth of Max, which is better than we can say for his other teammates for a very long time. Now, most sessions, when it comes to putting in the lap at the end of the session, that's when Max will deliver and Yuki is not able to, maybe never is able to, but certainly not right now. But, it's nice to see Red Bull being supportive of their second driver, because we don't get a lot of that. And I think it's going to help them out, to be fair. Of course, the main thing that would help Yuki out is if they make the car better. And right now, they have a big gap to McLaren, there's no doubt. We talked a lot about the rear tyres, the brake ducts, whatever trickery they may or may not be using to keep those rear temperatures under control. Red Bull may need to figure that out, but they also may just straight up need more performance, because they describe the current gap to McLaren is depressing. Max's gap in the championship to Oscar is now 32 points, which is considerable, to say the least. I mean, obviously a Max win and an Oscar DNF. There's also no fastest lap points anymore to potentially accrue as well. That Max had an interesting reaction to what happened in Miami, because Miami was pretty hot. It's not 100% a front-limited circuit. The rear tyres definitely do take a bit of a beating, which is just characteristics that do not favour Red Bull. Circuits like Jeddah are kind of as good as it's going to get for this Red Bull car. High speed, super front limited, top speed is important, and the McLaren is probably not the most efficient car in a straight line compared to what we have seen elsewhere. Still lost, but of course it was marginal. We had the turn one incident and all that type of stuff, and Norris was out of the picture because of what's happened during qualifying, of course. But Max tried the new upgrade, right? They only had one upgrade ready for Miami. Max had it on the car, and he says, difficult to assess. The circuit is somewhat unusual. Imola will give them a better idea, but this was a thread here that AMUS came out with, and I'll just go through it real quick, discussing this new upgrade and what it's really done, and frankly whether it's done enough, because this upgrade was intended for Imola. they brought it back a little bit further. They do have more upgrades on the way for Imola, but they certainly need it to work. The opinions seem to be split again at Red Bull in terms of who thinks this upgrade delivered what it should do and others that don't think it really did, but this is what it did anyway. So they brought that new floor to Miami. It had all the new sticky uppy bits on the outside of the floor, and effectively the intention was to deliver more downforce, but also the key issue that Verstappen definitely feels in the car is the understeering nature of the car. The balance shifts as they reach the apex towards understeer, difficult for the drivers to adjust to this shift of balance. Sometimes in qualifying, when the tyres are hot and in the right window, it can mask some of these issues fundamentally with the car. But yeah, the new floor was only fitted to Max's car because they only had one. They reckoned that based on their wind tunnel data, it was not massively disruptive. It was purely producing more downforce. It wasn't going to be aerodynamically unstable, which it wasn't, and it did seem to work. It just didn't really do much. I think that's the main issue, right? Because Red Bull only got a session of practice to really dial this in, and often if you bring an upgrade and you've only got a short amount of time, the likelihood is that the following weekend maybe you can actually get a bit more performance out of the upgrade by tweaking some setup ideas. But it seems like it's kind of like a plug and play. You chuck this new floor on and it's the same, but it just creates a bit more downforce. Horner says it delivered what we wanted, but I think Marco said after the Grand Prix that it's not done enough, basically. So again, you get this little split here between Horner and Marco. Horner says, well, it did what we expected it to do. And Marco's opinion is like, well, it's not really enough right now. It's part of a series of upgrades. So they do have more to come, right? Imola, there's more. Barcelona, there's going to be more. But it's a massively important couple of weekends. As Marco says, it got a little bit better with the new floor, this understeer issue, but we've still got work to do. I hope the solution will be ready in Imola so we can have a chance to find the proper balance anymore. We can only make small progress in many areas. Finding a cure is not so easy. The team back at Milton Keynes are working hard on it, but already it's a big gap to McLaren, and, obviously it's a long road ahead, but it's 32 points. It's not exactly ideal, and teams will have to see what happens with the technical directive on the flexi wings in Spain. Maybe that's going to change the competitive picture as well. But Horner says it's difficult to predict what the impact will be. It's not a small adjustment. It's a fundamental change. It will definitely have an impact on all cars and in many areas. It's a question of how much. So, look, could be good or bad for Red Bull. I think fundamentally they come away from Miami thinking that they wanted a bit more out of the upgrade package that they delivered, and obviously it wasn't going to be a great track for them anyway on paper. Imola should be better, I would say. It's been a good track for Max in recent years, and they do have major upgrades arriving for that circuit, whereas some of their rivals seemingly do not. So it's not all bad, but it needs to get better and fast, because as I mentioned at the start of the video, there has been a rumour that if these Imola upgrades fail or they do not give Max a chance to compete for this year's championship, Christian Horner's job, after all the drama over the last 12, 14, 16 months or so, is potentially going to be on the line. And look, let's be real, it's probably not going to be Ollie Oakes taking that job because he's currently in Dubai, according to rumours over the last couple of days. But you see what I'm saying, right? And of course, that has an implication for Max. And this is why I mentioned the comment about Mercedes earlier, is that if it's true that these upgrades do not deliver what they are intended to deliver, especially if Horner's job is on the line, Max may think, you know what? I mean, he's driving at the Nordschleife, right? Like, he's clearly got one eye away from his current project. He may consider doing something that would be considered pretty radical a couple of years ago and potentially leaving the team, in which case Toto Wolff will have to make a decision on what he wants to do, because Aston Martin will certainly not hesitate to make that happen if the opportunity arises. Look, as bad as it may or may not be for Red Bull and as many struggles as they currently have to deal with, they're still in the hunt, whereas Ferrari are nowhere near, and Ferrari aren't even going to bring anything over the next few rounds, not significant anyway. Their upgrades, as we discussed yesterday, are not going to be as substantial as some of the other teams, so it's kind of difficult to argue why they're even bothering right now in terms of, well, trying to bring a new floor for Silverstone is the big rumour. But yeah, it's going to be a big question to see how it goes. The teams are getting ready, by the way, out there in Imola. This is a setup of the Ferrari motorhome already happening. So yeah, today's Saturday, a week today, of course, it's going to be qualifying for the Imola Grand Prix, potentially one of the final Imola Grand Prix for some time, just because we know that there's a feeling anyway that Imola might well lose its spot on the calendar at some point. It's probably one of the races next on the chopping block. Monza isn't going to be going anywhere, let's be real. But yeah, some early looks here from the Imola paddock. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.